I'm glad you're back, because we find ourselves right in the middle of a long, complex argument. Maybe the most famous argument in the Nicomachean Ethics. We call it the function argument. And we've only looked at the first subpart of the argument so far. That is, we might call the hierarchy argument. Remember, the question that we're asking is, what is the highest good for a human being? And we began with this little hierarchy argument at the end of our last lecture, where Aristotle pointed out that many of our actions are performed for the sake of some end, and in that case, the end of the action is more important to us as the goal that's superior to the action itself. He also pointed out that our actions, like our sciences or our domains of activity, are often grouped hierarchically. When they're grouped hierarchically, it's the superordinate actions, the superordinate domains, the superordinate goals that are superior to the subordinate goals. So the example that he used was the example of horsemanship, where bridle making is subordinate to horsemanship, which is subordinate to the cavalry, subordinate to military strategy, maybe subordinate to diplomacy, and so forth. Now, Aristotle argued at the very end, if the hierarchy were infinite, so that for every good, it was only good for something else, then in a deep sense, all of our actions, all of our knowledge, all of our lives would be pointless, because there would be no answer to the question, why are we doing all of this? So Aristotle concludes, there must be a highest good. But that doesn't get us very far, because we now need to know, what is that highest good? What is it? Now, Aristotle already has argued that the highest good is going to be the good of the most subordinate science, the master science. And shortly after the discussion that we canvassed in our last lecture, Aristotle points out that all of the sciences, all of the arts, all of our enterprises of knowledge are aimed at human good. That's why we do things. We do things in order to benefit ourselves in some way. And Aristotle argues the collective good, the good of a group of people, is always better than the good of an individual. Now, what's the science that's the science of collective good? Well, that's political science, Aristotle argues, the science of governing a group of people in their own interest. And so Aristotle argues politics is the domain that orders and governs all of the other arts and sciences. They're all, in the end, subordinate to politics. So, he argues, politics is the master science, and the good at which politics aims, the end of politics, will end up being the highest good. But that still doesn't help us very much. What is that highest good? Now, interestingly, Aristotle cautions us in our investigation of the highest good. This is a wonderful piece of intellectual humility. He points out that even though the question, what is the highest good, is a deeply important question, it's not a question in which we can expect too much precision, for several reasons. One is that human affairs are a messy, irregular affair. It's a messy domain that we live in. There's a lot of details, a lot of variation. Some things might be good for some people, but bad for another. A good bit of money might be a really good thing for one person, but it might turn another into a compulsive gambler. A lot of food might be good for somebody who's starving, but really bad for a glutton. A glass of wine might be a good thing for one person, but dangerous for an alcoholic. Or some things are good at one time and bad at another time, and so forth. So hard and fast rules might be hard to come by. The other issue that Aristotle points out that leads to the messiness and approximateness of this domain is that some of the questions might involve answers that are kind of matters of taste. Just as we may ask, what is the best color to paint this wall? Or what is the best picture to hang in this room? Different people might disagree, not because one's right and one is wrong, but because there are different matters of taste. In human affairs, taste is an important thing. So for this reason, Aristotle argues, knowing about the good for human beings requires experience and judgment, not just some kind of abstract theoretical knowledge. And Aristotle has a wonderful remark on this. Aristotle writes, each man can judge competently the things that he knows. Therefore, a young man is not equipped to be a student of politics, for he has no experience in the actions which life demands. Moreover, since he follows his emotions, his study will be pointless and unprofitable. Whether he is young in years or immature makes no difference at all. So Aristotle is arguing here that thinking about the good life is something for mature people to do, not something for children. Not because it's hard, but because it's a complex matter that requires judgment, not knowledge. And we'll see Aristotle trying to exercise judgment as he goes on. Now, Aristotle begins with a kind of argument by elimination in trying to figure out what the highest good is. He's going to consider a number of reasonable alternative conceptions that were current in Greece and find reasons to dismiss them before going on to argue for his own position. He's going to dismiss the idea that pleasure is the highest good. It's going to turn out to be base. That honor is the highest good because of its fickleness. Because money is the highest good, it will be instrumental. Because excellence is the highest good, and so forth. These are the most obvious accounts. That's why Aristotle considers them. But it's also why he thinks a deeper investigation is going to be necessary. So now, let's really enter the text and see what happens. The first possibility that Aristotle considers is that pleasure is the highest good. And indeed, many people might think that to have a pleasant life is a good thing. But here's what Aristotle says. He says, the common run of people, and the most vulgar, identify it with pleasure. That the it here, by the way, is the highest good. And for that reason are satisfied by a life of enjoyment. They betray their utter slavishness in their preference for a life suitable to cattle. The argument here is really simple. Pleasure is something that's good even for cattle, even for pigs, for lower animals. We're looking for something that's distinctive to human beings. Just as we have a rational soul in a way that cattle and pigs don't. Whatever is going to be good for us is going to have to do with what we are about, not what they are. So pleasure is simply too base, too low, too common to be a reasonable answer to what the highest good is. Second possibility Aristotle considers is honor. Cultivated and active men, on the other hand, believe the good to be honor. For honor, one might say, is the end of political life. But, this is lovely, Aristotle says, this is clearly too superficial an answer, for honor seems to depend on those who confer it, rather than on him who receives it. Furthermore, men seem to pursue honor to assure themselves of their own worth. Obviously, then, excellence, as far as they are concerned, is better than honor. This is really nice. You could imagine somebody saying, the highest good, the thing that would make my life most fulfilling, would be a Nobel Prize, or a Congressional Medal of Honor, or election to the Academy of Arts and Sciences, some honor like that, or a chaired professorship, or something like that. And Aristotle answers that no sane person can think that that's really the highest good, and for two deep reasons. The first reason is this, that honor depends, as Aristotle says, more on those who confer it than on those who receive it. You've got to ask who's doing the judging. There are some people from whom you would not want the award. But more deeply, Aristotle points out, the reason we want honor in the first place is to confirm our idea of our own excellence. So if all the honor is doing is confirming our idea of excellence, then if honor is good, excellence is better. And that leads us to the next possibility, excellence itself. Aristotle asks, one might consider excellence rather than honor as the end of political life. Remember, politics for Aristotle is the master science. He continues, however, even excellence proves to be imperfect as an end, for a man might possibly possess it while asleep or while being inactive all his life, and while in addition undergoing the greatest suffering and misfortune. Nobody would call the life of such a man happy, that is, eudaimonia. This is really nice. Suppose you thought that excellence was the highest good. So you thought, for instance, I don't know, being the best fastball pitcher in baseball would be a fabulous thing to be. But suppose you were, but you never actually pitched a game. You might have the excellence, but never manifest it. And so an unmanifested excellence wouldn't be very good. That's why Aristotle says you might possess it while asleep or while being inactive. Moreover, suppose that you were the best fastball pitcher in baseball, and you even did manifest it, but the rest of your life was horrible. You were a drunkard, you became bankrupt, your children became criminals,